Hello, hello. What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing today? Welcome to the live stream for anybody who's joining. It's been a little while. Sorry, I've been kind of missing in action for the last. I'm trying to think now. It's probably been about a week and a half, maybe, since I did the live stream. So yeah, thanks for joining. And it's been crazy the last 2 weeks or so working on Didact. I For those of you who may not have joined the previous live streams, sorry, just a second. My sound is a little messed up. You'll have to bear with me if I if I had to like toggle some configurations or something or some settings while I'm streaming. Still kind of getting the hang of all this. It's a little complicated. Sorry, just one second. I'm playing some like sound. You should be hearing some little bit of sound through the audio that I've got. I'm trying to play through my headphones, but it is being a little silly. Sorry, just a second. My headphones don't want to seem to behave themselves. All right, give me just a second. I'll be right back. All right, I think maybe I'm back. We'll see. Sorry, my headphones just act super silly for some reason when I've got this on full screen mode. I can't figure out why. All right, I'll just turn the music down a little bit for the whole machine. There we go. Okay. Sorry if you can't hear the music very good. I have to be able to hear myself while I'm talking. Yeah, so sorry, I just realized my microphone was off. Oh, I see someone's in the chat. Hey David, what's going on? I think this is my first stream. Audio sounds good to me. Hey, appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for joining, David. Glad to have you here. Yeah, sorry about that. I was talking for like a whole 30 seconds and forgot my mic was muted. Yeah, welcome to the chat. Glad to have you, everybody. Yeah, so what I was saying a second ago was I haven't live streamed in about a week and a half because last time I live streamed, I started working on a Didact console. So just a little FYI for anybody who may not have joined last time. So I've got to finish up the primary apps for Didact, which is the UI and the engine and the CLI. So I've got three like primary apps in the open source repos that I've got to knock out. But since it's an open core business, I am trying to like do a little monetization to sustain it in the long term. And so I realized I needed like a customer app, like probably 2 months ago or so. And so the last two live streams, I kind of started working on some of that. So what I'm trying to do now, and what I'm probably gonna do today, is just kind of knock some of that out, get it done with as quickly as possible. It's just basically going to be like a little utility app for customers to log into, and we'll knock that out, and then we'll get back to the primary apps, the good stuff. So for you, David, I see this is your first stream, and for anybody else who may be in here, I'll just give you a quick little run through here. Let me move my face to the little bubble down here. So, architecturally, just as a quick recap for everybody, um, let me go to the Didact. We'll go to the Didact doc site. So, just as a quick reminder for everyone, I've got a few different repos that everybody needs, and this doc site's a little out of date, so actually, I apologize for that. But there's basically three applications that you'll be using as a user of Didact, which I mentioned a second ago. You'll have the engine, which is going to run all the background jobs. I call them flows in Didact. You'll have the user interface, which is going to be a web dashboard. Very, very awesome. I'm really excited to build that. And then you'll have a CLI, because Didact is more than just a library. It's a set of pre-built apps. And when you make background jobs, what you'll do is you'll send those background jobs as a class library, basically. And so using the CLI that I'm building, you'll be able to build and deploy that class library somewhere. And then you'll basically tell Didact where you built it and deployed it. It will absorb that class library and start running your background jobs. So it's a very different, Didact is a very different kind of background job solution versus the existing apps and like libraries that are in the C sharp, ecosystem today. Um, and I took a lot of inspiration from the Pythonic job orchestrators. So a lot of what I'm doing, I've seen in Python for years, and I've always been so jealous and always wanted to do it myself. And I'll show you a little bit of what I'm talking about. Let me change my resolution here on my desktop. Sorry, I realize y'all probably can't see my screen very well. David says, I'm excited to see it in action. David, I appreciate that. Me too. I am so excited to see this in action. Let me change my resolution real quick. There we go. Hopefully you guys can see that a little bit better, and I'll zoom into 110%. Still kind of getting the hang of some of these stream settings. I appreciate that, David. Yeah, this has actually been a dream of mine for like literally years to build this thing. And on this documentation site, there's a page called Why Build Didact, where I kind of go through like why I'm even doing this in the first place. And so I've got like a couple different sections where you can kind of understand my motivation for this. And one of the first sections is I've been so jealous of the Python orchestrators for so long because I've wanted something like this in C sharp forever, and nobody's ever really like come around and built it the way that I want. And I've been waiting for years and years and years, and nobody's ever really done it. And so I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it myself. So yeah, it's been a heck of a journey. What I was saying a second ago is one of the most important features that the Pythonic job orchestrators have is that they have zero downtime deployments. I really love that. And, just to talk about that for a minute, it was really difficult trying to figure out how to do this for a C sharp job orchestrator because Python is it's a scripting kind of a language. You don't have to go through like a whole compilation and a build step just to run Python. You can make a Python script, say in VS Code, and then you can just run Python and do like the name of your file, and you're done. But it's different in C sharp, right? In C sharp, we have a statically typed language. We have class libraries, and we have host apps like web APIs and desktop apps and console apps. And we have to go through this entire compilation and build step just to, yeah, David said interpreted. Correct. Thank you, David. You're 100% right. Python's an interpreted language. And here in C sharp, it's different. It's more difficult because it's a more involved process to get, a working application. So I was just thinking, like, I've been thinking for years now. I'm like, how do I build a job orchestrator for us in C sharp where you can create background jobs deploy those background jobs to like a host app that ideally I would build for you. And then you don't have to shut the app down or like change any of the code or rebuild it or anything like that. How do you like create background jobs, send it up somewhere, and the engine just keeps running like nonstop? And I have been thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, how do I do this for C sharp? And that's kind of what led me to take the approach that I'm doing in Didact today, where I've got a class library. And if you're looking at the screen, you'll see this on the What is Didact page in the docs. We've got a plugin section. And it kind of occurred to me, I was like, wait a minute, wait a minute. We have class libraries in C sharp, right? Where we can create this shared code that we can use amongst host apps and all that. And I was like, is there a way you could write, background jobs in a class library project, build and deploy that class library project somewhere, and then like it just gets absorbed by an engine and you're good. Like, and it just starts running. And so, um, David, I appreciate very much your encouragement because this has been a very long journey. I have been dreaming of Didact probably since like 2019 or 2020. And figuring out the zero downtime deployment where you can create background jobs and they just work and they get absorbed by the engine and it just works beautifully. That is like crazy, crazy difficult to do. Um, David said, wow, I've never heard of writing plugins to C sharp. That's incredible. I appreciate that, David. Thank you. It's weird, right? Like, it's crazy, David, because like no one talks about it in C sharp. It's so weird. Like, maybe we do class libraries sometimes, like maybe you've done them for yourself or at your company. I've done them like just a little bit at my day jobs previously, and they're really useful. And like a lot of times that's how people make NuGet packages. But for background jobs, so that you can have zero downtime deployments, I just realized, I was like, wait a minute, why hasn't anybody done this yet? Like, how come nobody's built a plugin architecture like that before? So that's kind of the idea with with how we're doing Didact. It's basically completely designed around a plugin architecture essentially. And yeah, you're totally right, David. Usually small shared logic packaged in NuGet, 100%, like 100%. And that's usually how I've seen that's usually how I've seen class libraries used as well. So it was like kind of an epiphany moment for me when I was thinking about Didact's design, way back when. I was like, oh, class libraries, that may be like a way where people can write background jobs, have an engine running up on a server, and like basically, can we just absorb those at runtime after the engine has started up? And it just works, and it's just great, and it just does exactly what you want. And so the good news is, I believe I have figured that out. The bad news for me is it's taken years, literally years, to figure that out. Oh goodness sakes! It was crazy kind of figuring out how to do all that. There's like a really small amount of people that ever talk about plugins in C sharp. By the way, I'll show y'all a cool little library that you may find interesting if you do like plugins. I'm not using this in Didact because for one, I didn't know about it at the time, and for two, I'm trying to use as few dependencies as possible and keep stuff just kind of like self-contained in Didact. But if you're curious a little bit more about plugins, um, there is a cool GitHub library that you might like by Nate McMaster called .NET Core Plugins. Highly recommend checking that out sometime. It's actually pretty cool. What Nate is doing in this GitHub repo is kind of some of the stuff that I'm doing in Didact as well, which is kind of interesting. Um, yeah, I think maybe I won't describe it for now. David, if you want to learn a little a little bit more about it, let me know because I'd be happy to talk about it with you. I love geeking out about this stuff with people. But if not now, then maybe later. I think I'd like to dive into like the core engine mechanics, like of how that's done. Um, like how do you take a class library, deploy it, build it, and absorb it and start using it at runtime without shutting the host app down? Like, how do you do all that? It was crazy figuring out how to do all that. Oh my goodness, it was crazy. So, yeah, if David, if you or anybody else are interested, let me know. We can chat about that for a minute because I love geeking out about this kind of stuff. Uh, David said, "Awesome, yeah. Please don't let me hold you back on the stream." No, 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 David, not at all. You're not holding me back. I'm so glad you're here. Like, I really appreciate you just stopping in, like even watching. No, you're awesome. No, like you're great. Don't even worry about it. I'm just so glad that there's some people in here. Like, this makes me so happy. Um, yeah, you know what? Why not? We'll talk about this for a second. I think that'd be cool to just kind of show you guys how exactly I'm gonna try and pull this off, essentially. So, let me. How about this? And this won't take but just a second. Let me open it up, and I'll show you all how I'm trying to go about doing this. Let's see. All right. I need the. I think it's in the engine. Let's check this out for just a second. So this is Didact Engine. This is the host app I'm building for Didact users. Ideally, you would just set this up as like a Docker image or like set it up on your server or something, and it just runs and runs and runs. While you do your background jobs and your flow libraries over here. Um, David said, "I'm super curious because it seems really complicated. I can only imagine hooking it all up in runtime." I appreciate that, David. I really, really appreciate that. It was insanely complicated. Oh my goodness, it was crazy complicated. I mean, no joke. Let me try reopening this again. No joke. I have like been trying to figure this out for like a couple of years. I know that sounds crazy because like, really, dude, that's a long time to like be working on a C# app. But yeah, no, 100%. Like, it's crazy how long it's taken me to figure out how to do this. Uh, it's been an interesting experience. Sorry, for some reason. Let me try this one more time. Little get my Visual Studio Solutions not opening. Oh, you know what it is? I I think this is an SLNX file. Sorry, give me just a sec. Is that an SLNX file? It is. Oh, okay. Yeah, heads up for anybody in the chat. If you use SLNX, you need .NET 9. I forget I've got .NET 8 on this computer. That's okay. Let me just show you real quick. I can show you here in GitHub. Didact Engine. Here's a cool little trick I learned. By the way, if you go to a GitHub repo and press the period key on your keyboard, apparently it opens up like a web-based Visual Studio code like in your browser. Did not know that for the longest time. That was interesting. Okay. It's either in this one or it's in Didact Core, which is a NuGet package project that I'm working on. Let me see which one of these it's in. Task schedulers. Nope, that's not it. Let me do. David said, "No way." I know. Yeah, no, 100%. I forget where I found that, David. I think it was on like someone's YouTube video or something. They were like, "Oh yeah, just press the period key on your keyboard and you can do VS Code in the browser." I was like, "What? Nobody ever told me that." It's like crazy handy. For example, when you forget to install that .NET 9 on your computer, like I have. I always learn something new every day. Okay, I think it's in here. Yes, here it is. So this is kind of interesting. David said, I tried self-hosting a Docker image of VS Code, and it was lackluster, but having it on GitHub is game-changing. Yeah, for sure, David. I 100% agree. You said you tried self-hosting it as a Docker image? I, I've never tried that with VS Code. I bet that, yeah, lackluster is probably a good word. I imagine that was not super duper fun. My condolences. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, so I'll show you all this. This is kind of interesting. So here's some interesting .NET magic for you if you did not know this. So when you create a class library, and let's say that you want a host app like a web API, like Didact Engine that I'm building, you want the host app to be able to use that class library. But let's just assume the class library is not available at compile time. Your host app started, let's say, 10 minutes ago. So the startup process that's in program.cs has been completed, and the host app is running on your server. And now you want to take a class library that you created over here, and you want to have your host app absorb it at runtime without shutting it off. How do you do that? So after literally several years of trying to figure this out, I learned about this crazy class in .NET called the assembly load context. And let me zoom in. I want you to be able to see this clearly. Sorry, give me just a sec. Where is the zoom? Oh, there we go. Let's see. Full screen. I'm going to feel silly here in a second because I'm trying to find the zoom on the web VS Code. I've got like the whole browser zoomed in, but I think the code is still kind of small. Let me see if I can make that a little larger. Is there not a zoom button on here? Am I crazy? Let me see if maybe I can just zoom in on the browser just a little bit more. Yeah, okay, there we go. You can probably see it a little easier now. So I learned about this interesting class called the assembly load context. So this is a class that is built into the .NET like runtime that you can use. I think it's either a base class or an abstract class. It may be a base class. I can't quite remember. So essentially, you can use this class. You inherit it, I should say, with your own class that you write. So I wrote one called plugin assembly load context. And essentially, you use this to target plugins at runtime where you allowed the .NET runtime in like your host app to absorb your plugin. So one like kind of interesting thing is the assembly load context. So just to like a quick, I guess, background in .NET Framework. So back in the olden days before .NET Core came around, you had what's called an app domain, and in one .NET app, like say in one process, you could have multiple app domains inside of one app. But they changed that with .NET Core, and so now you only have one app domain inside of a .NET Core app, and we don't call it .NET Core now. I know, we just call them .NET apps, but in modern .NET apps, you only have one app domain now. You don't have multiple. But their solution for that, since people used to use multiple app domains sometimes on old .NET Framework apps, the new solution is the authors of .NET said, well, if you need to box up plugins at runtime and do some crazy magic stuff like this, we're going to give you a new class. It's not an app domain. We're only going to have one app domain in .NET Core stuff going forward. But we'll give you a new box that you can put stuff in called, sorry, I'm off camera, called an assembly load context. And so this assembly load context class, the way that I think about it is it's kind of like a box around DLL files. And it's crazy cool because you can essentially use them at runtime after an app has gone through its startup process and absorb a plugin without shutting your host app down. And what it does is, like, in the background, David said, that's awesome. Isolated, almost application context. 100% correct, David. 100% correct. And essentially, it boxes your class library plugin and any dependencies that it has, and like embedded files, and really just anything, I guess, that's in the class library plugin. It basically isolates it in a box, and you can load as many of them as you want. One of them, 10 of them, 100 of them. I think the only constraint is memory. Like, essentially, you just have to not burn through all your system resources. Um, and so these assembly load context classes have what are called assembly dependency resolvers. And this is, I think it's a static. No, I'm sorry. It's not static because we're using the new keyword. Sorry, there's a word that's escaping me. Anyway, this is the built-in class. I'll just say that. It's a built-in class from the authors of .NET. This is called an assembly dependency resolver. This essentially has like all of the magical file system stuff that makes DLLs kind of like wire up together. And you'll notice on the constructor of this class, you basically just pass the plugin path of where your plugin DLL file is. And this assembly dependency resolver, it basically takes care of everything else, which is interesting. And David said, almost like a form of virtualization. Yeah, kind of, David. Like, I've been trying to wrap my head around this the last couple of years. I've been learning about it. Yeah, I would say that that's probably like a decent description of it. It's really interesting, almost like a form of virtualization. Yeah, it kind of is. It's like, you've got your process here. You've got your app domain here, which there used to be multiple of them. Now there's only one. And now below an app domain, you've got an assembly load context. So yeah, kind of. It's almost kind of like, what Docker is to like a VM architecture is sort of like what you could say assembly load contexts are to app domains are to app processes. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good description of it, actually. Yeah, so it's really interesting. Basically, this little magic class, assembly load context, this is the box that isolates everything, which is really interesting. This was also really hard, though, because you may notice, like, what in the world is going on here on lines like 20 through 35. David said, I guess it's also like a managed subprocess. Yeah, that's kind of what my take was too. It's like a subprocess construct that's like built into .NET where they kind of just manage it themselves. It's crazy cool. Like, it's crazy cool. Yeah, subprocess, I think, is another good word for it. And so, like, this was kind of interesting when I learned about this because each, assembly load context is like its own isolated box. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So, like, how does that work with like a shared interface or something like that? And then I started thinking about, reflection and that sort of thing. And I was like, oh, you know what? Reflection is kind of weird now too with assembly load context, right? Because like most of the time, most .NET authors, like most .NET developers, I should say, they're not going to be using like runtime plugins like Didact is. This is an exceptional app for an exceptional use case. Most people are never going to do this kind of stuff. But I was like, sorry, my mind was going somewhere with that train of thought. What was I talking about? Like the shared interfaces and right, reflection. Sorry. Yeah, I was thinking about reflection, And I was thinking about how most, .NET devs, since they're not doing this sort of thing, I was like, okay, so when you run a normal .NET app, you basically only have one assembly load context in your host app that's running at a time, because there's a default one that gets started whenever you create like a .NET app and you run it. There's like a default assembly load context. It's just that if you're not doing any kind of crazy like runtime plugin stuff like we're doing here. Oh, sorry, YouTube ad. Give me 1 sec. I'll just mute the music for a minute. Let that go by. There we go. Sorry about that little YouTube ad. Yeah, you essentially just have one default assembly load context inside of, most .NET apps today. And I was like, that could be kind of weird with like reflection. Like, what if you're trying to find like an interface and you have interface A here and you have interface B here? Well, what if interface A is like in your host app? So it's just like in a folder or something, easy peasy stuff, right? It's available at compile time. And I was like, what if you have interface B from a plugin that you loaded 5 minutes ago after startup? Can reflection find it since it's in its own box and its own, assembly load context? And the answer is yes, all of that can work. Reflection, I learned in .NET, can jump across multiple assembly load contexts. The trick is you have to target the right assembly. And so if you know which assembly an interface is found in, or I guess, you could traverse all the assemblies, then it is possible actually to do like reflection across assembly load contexts, which is super interesting. So maybe if you can kind of see where my mind is going with this for a minute, I was thinking, right, when I was designing all this, I was like, okay, let me get this straight. So I'm going to have a host app that's running on a server that's Didact Engine. You could have 1 or 100, flow libraries that you create, right? Each one is a different, class library. So if you let's just say 3. Let's just keep the example easy. You've got Didact Engine up here on the server. You've got 1, 2, 3 different flow libraries where you create background jobs. Interesting. Okay. So now I'm thinking as the architect of Didact, I'm like, okay, great. So you want to be able to take each one of those 3 flow libraries, you want to build them, you want to publish them, deploy, or not publish them, but you want to build them, you want to deploy them. The engine needs to find where they are. It needs to absorb them, like copy them to like a local runtime directory or something, wherever they are in a GitHub repo, in an S3 bucket, in an Azure Blob, storage, whatever. It needs to find them, bring them down, grab them, and then for each of those 3 plugins, we got to make a box. So box 1, box 2, box 3. Each plugin goes in its box. That contains all of its dependencies. That contains all the code that you write in the plugins, any embedded files that you have, all that kind of stuff. So you've got 3 assembly load contexts. You've got your 3 boxes, your 3 class libraries. Now I need to make the engine be able to create these boxes, absorb these boxes, and use these boxes without you ever shutting it down. And not only that, but if you have background jobs from each of the 3 boxes that we've made, let's say you set up like a cron schedule for all of them. So when Didact looks into its database and goes, oh, hey, flow XYZ over here needs to run in the next 2 seconds, then I had to figure out like, okay, so flow XYZ is going to be in a class library you deployed. It's going to be in one of these boxes. I've got to find it, and I've got to make sure I'm looking in the right box. And then all the dependencies and stuff that it needs, I got to make sure all that works too. And so David said, wow, I'm seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. Right, my friend? Right? When you like see it, kind of like when you think through like, all the architecture, like once I finally figured this out, I was like, oh my gosh, This is crazy, everybody. We can make plugins. We can define them, deploy them, build them, absorb them, and use them at runtime, and it just works. And I was like, this is actually kind of crazy. Like, why are more people not using this? This is awesome. Um, and that's kind of the magic. Yeah. Sorry, David. That was kind of a long, that was sort of a long rant by me. But essentially, this is like one of the core pieces of magic that that makes everything wire up together in Didact. This is how you create your class libraries, deploy them, and the engine runs them. And all of that should happen without you ever having to shut down the engine. And this, this is why it's taken me years of my life to figure this out, because just kind of running through all this, and designing all this, I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, I think I see the light at the end of the tunnel too. And sorry, let me turn that music down just a little bit. There we go. Sorry if the music is like ultra low. I'll bring it back in just a second. Yeah. So anyway, I've been melting my brain for like a couple years now trying to figure all this out. It's been crazy. David said, "That's awesome. I really appreciate the explanation. I can't imagine implementing it." David, you are the boss. I appreciate that, my friend. Yeah, it's been a nightmare. It's been a nightmare to implement it. Oh, it's been the most painful thing I think I've ever tried to design in my life. It's like, we're taking like, a compiled statically typed, language here where people are used to doing things at like compile time and stuff like that. And we're trying to we're trying to like make it into some crazy runtime thing that just works. It's like, yeah, it's wild. I guess I've just been drooling over all the Pythonic orchestrators for so long. I just wanted so bad, so bad. I just wanted us to be able to have those kind of features, in C sharp. So, no, actually, David, I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for sitting through all that. I should like chop this up into shorts or something and publish it on the YouTube channel. Yeah, so David, if you've been following Didact for a while, and for anyone else that's in here, all I have to say is I'm so sorry it's taken me so long to do all this. I mean, it's been insanity trying to design all this. And so, I've also been working, the last couple of years, and I've decided to take the leap of faith for the moment, and I'm full time on this, and I'm really pumped because I want this to be a long term project, for you, David, and for anybody else in the chat, and for all of the .NET community. I want this to be like the premium job orchestration tool, that you can use. I want this to be like the go-to that people use to create background jobs and implement them. Like, I want this to be the best of the best that we have in C sharp. And I think we're just long overdue something, a job orchestrator like this. Like, I think it's gonna be good. I think it's gonna be really, really good for the ecosystem. Like, a lot of people hopefully will find this useful. So yeah, I'm excited. Oh, we got someone else in the chat. Anthony Hartwig said, "I'm curious how slowly slash quickly you can load these dependencies, and how do you manage offloading any unneeded dependencies?" Yeah, that's a great question, Anthony. So, you know, let me think about that for a minute. Let me answer your first question. I'm curious how slowly slash quickly you can load these dependencies. So this is a part of the doc site that I haven't had a chance to update yet, and I apologize, Anthony. I was telling David and everyone else in chat earlier. I'm finally to a point where I can do this full time, and I can update the doc site and everything. But how slowly such quickly can you load these dependencies? So here's kind of my idea with this one, Anthony. So essentially, you'll have a flow library that you create. You'll publish it somewhere. Let's say that you have a GitHub repository where that flow library is pushed up to from your local machine. So you push that flow library up to your local machine. Let's say that you have like a GitHub action and you build that library and you store its build artifact, maybe up in GitHub somewhere. It could be like, just one DLL file or something. So ideally, what I'm going to do in Didact is build integrations with a few different plugin providers, is essentially what I'm trying to call it. So your local file system could be one. A network drive could be another one. A GitHub repository could be one. Wherever it is that you publish your flow library, let's just say you publish it and you build it somewhere. Didact, using the CLI that I'm building that you'll have available, you would basically type in a few commands. You would point it at wherever your library is. And when you do that and run your little CLI command, that'll essentially make a record or a set of records in Didact's database, and the engine will have a polling process, and it will check periodically to see if there are new flow libraries that it needs to go grab from somewhere. If it finds one, which in this case it would, since you just kind of made like a new CLI command, you just said, hey, I have a flow library, I built it and sent it somewhere, I need you to go get it. When that happens, Didact engine will use the integrations I'm building to go grab it. When that happens, what I'm envisioning happening is Didact engine will stream that DLL from wherever it's coming from. And again, it could be GitHub, your local file system, it could be wherever. It'll bring that down. And I think what I'm going to do is shadow copy it. I don't know if that's like a word. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a runtime directory for each plugin. So like while Didact engine is running, and it's checking the database to see if there's new libraries to go fetch. If it finds one, it's going to make a directory at runtime where it's going to copy that DLL file or like set of DLL files. And then because those files are copied locally to like whatever machine Didact engine is running on, my understanding is it should be pretty quick. Because this assembly load context class that you're looking at here on my screen, I would essentially just be right here in the constructor of the class. I would just be sending in the string of the runtime directory that I just copied the DLL to. So hopefully it should be pretty quick to answer your question, because we're not going to be jumping over the network or anything. Initially, I may need to jump over the network. Like if I need to grab your DLLs, from, a network drive or GitHub or something, there will be a network jump. But then once the plugin is cached, locally in that runtime directory, hopefully it should be pretty quick because it'll just be a local file system kind of assembly resolving. So yeah, hopefully pretty quick. David said basically local caching. It sounds like 100%, David. Yeah, 100% correctly. Yeah. David said dependencies and compatibility are the scary parts to me. Do you have a way to identify that a DLL file is using the right version of .NET / does failing to load a plugin happen gracefully? Yes. So let me get to your question in a second, David, because that's an excellent question. Anthony, the other thing you asked was how do you manage offloading any unneeded dependencies? So the one thing that I like about these, that's a great question, David. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. So, Anthony, for your second question, how do you manage offloading unneeded dependencies? So, one thing that I like about Didact is that I like that, or not Didact, excuse me, the assembly load context class. One thing that I like about that is you're supposed to be able to unload them pretty easily. There's a few stipulations that I found in the .NET docs where if you load an assembly load context class in with a plugin, when can you terminate it, or not terminate it, but basically when can you unload it gracefully? What are the conditions necessary for that? I read through the conditions to try and kind of understand how exactly that can be done gracefully. My understanding is it should be pretty easy. The main thing is going to be if you have a plugin flow library that you're done with and you want to kick it out of Didact Engine, Essentially, that should be able to happen as long as you don't have any flows that are running from that specific flow library plugin. And what I'm doing in Didact is if a plugin in the engine is flagged for dismissal or if it's flagged for like unloading, essentially Didact is going to have some internal fetching logic where it will filter any jobs that that plugin requires out of all of its modules. And so if you're wanting to unload a specific plugin from the engine, it will stop running any flows from the database that belong to that plugin, and any flows that are running, it will allow them to gracefully finish. And then when that happens, all of the bytecode from that plugin should not be used. We won't have any hard references to it. We won't have any instantiations that belong to that plugin. And I believe, per the stipulations I read on that documentation page on Microsoft Docs, we should be able to kick it out of the Didact engine at that point and free up memory. So I believe that's how we're going to unload flow libraries that are not used. And then the other tricky part is going to be there are some interfaces and classes that Didact engine needs and you're going to need when you make flow libraries. In other words, like there's going to have to be some shared, abstractions between the two. And so I realized whenever you do reflection in .NET, if you have the same exact interface with the same exact version and the same exact typing information, but it comes from two different assembly load contexts like you're seeing on my screen, .NET Reflection will treat them as two different types, even if the names and the versions and everything are exactly the same, because assembly load contexts are basically boxed away from each other. Reflection will not realize that they're like actually of the same. So one thing that I had to do, and this actually answers your question a little bit, David, because you asked about plugin versioning, and I'm so glad you guys are asking me about this. Like, oh, this is the good stuff. This is the good stuff. So what I had to do here was in the assembly method that you're seeing, or the load method in the assembly load context, you'll notice there's some weird code right here where I'm doing default.assemblies.first or default. So like what's up with that? So basically what this is saying if you have any shared abstractions that Didact Engine needs, and also you had to use those abstractions in your flow libraries, which you will, because I'm going to have a NuGet package for you with some abstractions that you will use in your flow libraries. So if reflection won't recognize them as being the same, even if they have the same name in the version normally, because remember each assembly load context, right, is in its own little, box. Well, then how do I wire that up? So I realized in the assembly resolver, if there are shared abstractions between the host app and the plugins, you can actually point the assembly resolving process or logic, I guess I should say, to look in the host app for the interfaces and whatever else you need, and it will basically route stuff dynamically. This statement on line 22 is basically saying, look inside the default assembly load context that gets spun up in your .NET app, and if you find a match, use that. Otherwise, go into the plugins DLL and find whatever you need in there. And using this method, I can use reflection to make jumps across assembly load context boxes, including when an interface is in the host app and then the interface is in the plugin. So I think that's going to be a nice way, to be able to pull that off. This was an actual nightmare to figure this out. This was like this was a nightmare. Oh my gosh, it was so bad. David, you asked Anthony, let me know if I answered your question. Hopefully I did. I apologize if that was a little long-winded. But let me know if I answered your question well, or if you want me to follow up on any of that. And then David asked, or David said, the dependencies and the compatibility are the scary parts to me. Do you have a way to identify that a DLL file is using the right version of .NET / does failing to load a plugin happen gracefully? And then David said, as far as plugin versioning, how do you decide when to update the locally cached version? And Anthony said, "You got it, brother. Thanks. Appreciate that, Anthony. Thank you." Yeah, so excellent question, David. And Anthony, you'll probably find this kind of interesting too. So this, David, I'm so glad you asked that. This is another reason that it's taken me so long. This is why I've been radio silent for a while. Um, oh my gosh, this was so bad to figure out. David said, by the way, dang, there's no way that load method was documented anywhere as being able to do that. I know, David, I know, right? Why didn't they say this in the docs? Could someone not have shared this with the rest of the .NET team? And now you can't open up pull requests. I don't know if you guys know this. You can't even open up pull requests on Microsoft Docs anymore if you want to like contribute, like a change or whatever. I think they took that away. I'm not even sure if you can contribute, or at least there's parts of Microsoft Docs where you can't even contribute anymore. I could be wrong about that, but like I've wanted to go back to the docs and add some of the stuff. Anyway, yeah, I feel you, David, 100%. Um, yeah, so David, you asked an excellent question though. Plugin versioning. How do we handle this, right? This is tricky stuff. What if I have a version change with a flow library? What if I have a version change with the engine? How do I make sure that, assemblies get wired up correctly? How do I handle not just caching plugins when I deploy them with the Didact CLI, and then the engine goes and it fetches them and all that kind of stuff. But like, how do I handle, updates essentially to it? How do we handle unloading gracefully, which we talked about a second ago, just a little bit, and then how do we handle, versioning? And David brings up a great point because let's say that you have a background job where you're like, you're running like a SQL statement in your database, and you're updating something in your customer table, but like maybe you made a change to your app database, and like now your SQL statement has like a where statement on it or something you didn't have last time. So like if your background job runs, once an hour, well, okay, the next time it runs, right, you're gonna want it to use like the newer version with updated SQL and all that kind of good stuff. So how does that work in Didact? Great question, David. Um, I really struggled with this a few months ago. Um, this is all before I went full time on Didact recently, and this is part of kind of why I've been radio silent the last few months because I've been trying to figure that out too. How do we handle versioning? And I looked at some of the orchestrators that are in Python today. Like I looked at Apache Airflow, I looked at Prefect, I looked at Dagster, I looked at one called Kestra, which is written in Java, and a couple other ones. Because I was really curious. I was like, well, how do they do it? Like, do they even care about versioning, and how do they figure that out? And how do they make it all wire it up together? Because you bring up a great point, David. Like, you know, plug-in versioning can be pretty important. Like, we got to make sure that stuff works the way it's supposed to. So I have a solution for that. It is not fully fleshed out at the moment to answer your question, David, but I can actually show you kind of what I'm thinking to sort of handle this. And this is incomplete. I don't have it fully done just yet. Um, but I have a really good idea of where I'm going with this, and I think it's going to work. I've really thought this over a lot. And before I show the classes here in my web-based VS Code, Anthony and David and anybody else in chat, can you guys tell me, like, is plugin versioning important enough that you would want it to be working in the first version of Didact, or would you be okay with that coming a little bit later? Because I was kind of the opinion that that needed to be something that was working V1, because that's really important in my opinion. But I thought, like, well, if you're not updating your flow library super often, and if you don't have a lot of them, we could probably get by without it for a short while. But like I would very soon after version one need to add that. So Anthony, David, anybody else in chat, could you let me know if this is something you want in V1? That would really help me kind of understand where that falls on the priority list. And while you're doing that, I'll show you kind of how I want to approach this. Give me just a second here. Turn the music back up just a teeny tiny bit. Sorry, that felt like it was weird hearing my voice without any music in the background for so long. Okay, let me show you guys what I'm thinking here. Here we go. Anthony says, I don't think I have a strong opinion on that, to be honest. Okay, hey, that's good to know, Anthony. I appreciate that because I was really scratching my head the last couple of months and I was thinking, like, oh my gosh, if this is a V1 feature that I need, I was like, that's going to be a little bit of a tough one. But then I thought, but like, it's totally essential. Like, people are going to need it. So I appreciate the feedback, Anthony. David said, honestly, as long as there's a manual way to stop the old version and load the new one, that would probably be fine, even if you have to deploy the flow under a new name each time. Okay, all right, that's fair, David. I appreciate that. So I appreciate both of you saying that because I actually was kind of the opinion people would like be very displeased with Didact if it did not do that in the first version. I thought that like that may turn a lot of people off. So I actually really appreciate that. Thank you both for telling me that. Um, because that kind of gives me some ideas. Maybe it could be a temporary inconvenience. Maybe it could be a temporary workaround. Just for the time being, and then I'll come back and I'll fix that. I will show both of you, while we're talking about it. I'll show you kind of what my idea is in the entities section that I've got in Didact Core, and some of this needs to be moved. Sorry if my Git repos are a little bit messy. I apologize. I need to move some of this out of Didact Core and put it in the engine where it belongs. I've just been slowly experimenting and ideating and architecting all this stuff for years, so I've kind of just thrown stuff in a few different places. This is going to be a NuGet package that you'll use when you make your flow library. So stuff like this probably doesn't belong in there per se. So anyway, I apologize for that. I'm going to clean a lot of this stuff up. But anyway, here's some of the entities that I'm going to have in Didact. And you might find this kind of interesting because I have what is called an execution version. And this class right here, this entity, I should say, this is going to be in the Didact database. And essentially, what I'm thinking is when you run a flow, let's just say, I know Anthony and David, you both said, you're not like, this isn't a must have per se in D1. Let's just pretend that, we're in a later version of Didact then. If you want to handle plugin versions appropriately, my idea was, what if we had like a composite version? So what if when you have a flow library plugin that you create, you can assign an assembly version to a class library. And then I was also thinking, I was like, well, you could also probably do a version at the flow level. And here's why I was kind of thinking about two versions. Because on one hand, I was thinking like, okay, let's say you have a flow library here and you've got, 3 flows in it. If you have something change in one of the flows, but the other 2 don't change, and none of the dependencies in that flow library change either, you're literally just changing one thing, right, in one flow. Then I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, I mean, you're changing a part of the class library still. That's true. But I was like, but also you're just changing one flow and you're not really changing the other 2. Maybe you would kind of want to know that. Maybe that would kind of help us with the, cache invalidation. And then I thought, well, what if it's the other way around? What if you have your flow library with your 3 flows in it? And then like, what if they're using a NuGet package you added in your flow library and you update the NuGet package? Okay. So now you're not changing the flows per se, but like now you're changing a dependency in the flow library, in the class library. And so I was like, okay. Yeah, that's kind of important to know too, right? The flow code may have not changed, but the dependencies did, or one of the dependencies did. And so I was thinking, like, you know what? What if we did like a composite version? So the flow library has a version, and the flow itself has a version. What if we combine those two things together and we kind of have a composite version? And then when it's time to figure out how to deal with plugin versions, how to offload old versions and load new ones in, what if we use this composite version as references in Didact Engine when we're loading and unloading, assembly load context and all that kind of stuff, and we're doing, reflection calls and all that? What if we could use this to our advantage to sort of filter out the old stuff and only run the new stuff? That's more or less kind of what I was thinking with this. Um, so it's not a fully fleshed out feature yet. And with the feedback from both of you and a couple other people I've talked to, I think maybe, I won't worry about this per se on version one, but it will come, quickly afterwards, probably in a subsequent version. But essentially, that's kind of the idea. And one thing that I was thinking about, David said, love the composite version idea. I appreciate that, David. And Anthony, let me know what you think about that too. Or, if you have any, critiques or any better ideas, I'm very much open to feedback from both of you, and from anybody else in the community. Um, and I was just kind of thinking like, yeah, okay, that would be kind of like a good idea, right? To like figure out how to only run the new stuff. And I was just thinking, I was like, yeah, okay. So what if when I load an assembly load context, right? So let's go back to the box for a minute. So we've got the box where we put each plugin into. So what if in Didact Engine, maybe I have like a dictionary or like a hash set or something like that, and I have a reference to each plugin's assembly load context, and then in each assembly load context, I've got basically like a list or a hash set of all the execution versions that belong to that specific plugin. And an execution version, that's what I'm calling the composite version. I tried to give it like a somewhat cool name, and so I was like, execution version. Yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. So essentially, like in Didact Engine, I would have boxes where I put each plugin in, and then each of those plugin boxes would have like a hash set or something of all the execution versions that are compatible. And that would almost give me like what's the word I'm looking for? Like when Didact Engine wants to look in the database and it wants to figure out like, hey, what can I run exactly? Um, it would have maybe in like a singleton service or something I could create, it would have all those execution versions from all those plugins. And when it makes calls to the SQL database where all the metadata is stored, it would be able to filter what it's allowed to run. Does that make sense? So like if there's a new version of a flow that's out there, and you have an instance of Didact Engine that doesn't have that flow's most updated execution version, it would be smart enough to know it can't run it, essentially. And it would be able to filter that out in its execution attempts. So like only the new stuff would be ran, for example. I'm thinking like if you have like a fleet of engines, maybe you have like a cluster of them, like three engines on three different servers or something. Well, like it could be the case that like one engine has one set of plugins loaded, but a different engine has a different set of plugins loaded. Or like maybe one engine has the old versions, but a different engine has the new versions. But they have to be smart enough to figure out which ones they can run and which ones they cannot run. That was kind of the idea behind it, if that makes sense. David said, sorry, so you could instantly roll back. And David said, that would be powerful. Right? I think so too, David. I appreciate that. David said that reminds me of versioning server and mobile app where you have a min and max compatible version. 100%. Yeah, and I didn't per se think about that specific approach at first, but like a min and max compatible version. I think that would be kind of interesting. Or like, for you, David and Anthony and anyone else, like, here's an interesting idea. What if in Didact's database or like in the engines or the CLI, what if I gave you compatibility policies or something like that? What if for a specific flow from a specific plugin, well, what if I gave you an option where you could like create maybe in the user interface or in like a CLI call or something? What if you could actually write your own compatibility versions for a whole plugin or like a specific flow? That might be kind of interesting, right? Then you could do like some crazy stuff. You could be like, oh yes, well for this plugin here, I want to do this, this, and this, and then for this flow over here, I want this one and this one and this one, and for that one, we can use this version and this one and da 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 da. And like you could just chop it and slice it and do like you could do all sorts of crazy stuff with that. I don't know if a lot of people would need that per se, but I think it's possible with something like the execution version and all the other stuff we're talking about. Like, I think you could do that. I think you could define compatibility policies for like a specific plugin or a flow or something. And you could get real fancy with how you want to run your background jobs. That's kind of the idea behind it, if that makes sense. Thoughts? Agree? Disagree? Any criticisms? Any questions? Like, does any of that not make sense? Or like, yeah, I'm open to feedback if you guys have any feedback from that. Um, that's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah. It feels really good to talk to you guys about this. I just have to say thank you like a gazillion times. Thank you so much for chatting with me about this, by the way. Like, I have no one to talk to about this. And like, I've been dreaming all this up for months. And I haven't done a very good job, keeping people informed about how I'm building all this. And I only just started live streaming. I probably should have done this a couple of years ago, to be honest, but I didn't quite know how to do live streams. But it just feels good to talk to somebody about this. Thank you both, and anyone else in here. Thank you for listening. This is so much fun. Um, David said that would be super cool. Probably pretty overkill for day one. You're probably right. You're probably right. Based off your answer, David, and what Anthony said, and what a couple other people have said, um, I think you're right. That probably is a little bit overkill for day one. I have a bad tendency to want to over perfect everything, and I just got to get this darn thing shipped, and I got to get it out there so you can use it. So, yeah, you're 100% right about that. You're 100% right. I think it's probably overkill for day one. I think it would be great to have it in a month after, a few months after. It would be a great release note, a great subsequent version. I will say, I agree with you. I don't think it's a V1 thing, but I have seen people ask for this in some of the other, background job libraries, so it's interesting. Anthony said, got a jet, but love this format. Love to see some cool live demos and sample flows. I love seeing the nitty gritty details. Hey, I appreciate that, Anthony. Thanks for joining. Thanks for hanging out for a little bit. Appreciate your feedback on all this. By the way, if you're still in here, Anthony and David as well, would you both be interested in like a Discord? Do you use Discord or like Teams or anything? Because if you do and you want to like chat with me more often, maybe we should do like a Discord server or something. A couple other people recommended that. So Anthony, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got to go, but if you think a Discord or something would be interesting, would you send me an email to my Didact email? It's Daniel at didact.dev, and Anthony said yes. Okay, cool, Anthony. Um, Anthony, would you mind? I guess if you're okay with it, maybe just send me like your Discord username, or better yet, Anthony, if you're not on the wait list, go ahead and put your email on there, and I could send like a newsletter or something, and I can give you all the Discord link, and then you could join. Yeah, if that would be cool. David said I use Teams daily and Discord weekly. Totally. Okay, cool, cool, cool. We can do a Discord then. Anthony, I'll be respectful of your time. I appreciate that. Oh, look at Anthony said just got back from AWS Summit. This is some of the better tech deep dive, and they offered a lot. I appreciate that, Anthony. To know that you talked to some people at AWS and you enjoyed this, I think you just made my whole week. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. So appreciate it, Anthony. Thank you very much. See you, Anthony. David said, newsletter is how I got here. That sounds great. Oh, awesome. Thank you, David. I I actually wanted to live stream when the newsletter got sent out because I was kind of hoping that maybe somebody would join. So yes, you totally made this whole effort worth it. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go and talk to my wife about this for the next like 17 hours. She's probably gonna tear my hair out. Um, thank you. Thank you for telling me that, David. I was hoping somebody in the newsletter would I was hoping somebody in the newsletter would like come join so we could chat a little bit. So thank you very much. And I appreciate the feedback about Discord from you and Anthony both. Um, I will do that. I'm gonna start a Discord so we can all chat with each other a little bit more often. So heck yeah. Awesome. You both made this whole thing totally worth it. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the idea. Going back to your questions, David, about plugins, about versioning, about all that kind of stuff. I think the biggest thing by far is just going to be getting this thing out. I need to finish up the first version, and just get this to all of you, so you can use it. Um, and I appreciate the feedback about the plugin versioning. That takes a lot of pressure off for a first version of Didact to not quite have to tackle that just yet. Interestingly, I have seen some other people ask about versioning. It doesn't happen super often, but I was looking at the GitHub repos for Quartz.net and Didact in sorry, Quartz.net and Hangfire, maybe Corvel. I can't remember for sure, and a few other ones. Um, anyway, there are a few people who have asked for it, but it's good to know it's not a V1 thing. So yeah, appreciate the feedback. By the way, David, is there any like interesting features you would like to see for version one? Um, you know what? I have a link that you might find actually kind of interesting. Um, I have a roadmap for product features where people could go and upvote things they might find interesting. And I'm just curious for you, David, if there is anything you might find interesting that you do want to see in a version one. Um, I just dropped a link in the chat to the product roadmap for Didact. Um, it's a little bit out of date, but I more or less try to keep it fairly up to date with what I'm working on, just so people can have an idea for what it is I'm working on. And also, I want to get regular feedback from everybody so I can figure out what everybody else feels is important about this. And if there's any features on the roadmap you like or that you feel are missing, let me know on the roadmap here, or just drop it in chat while we're talking. Um, I would love to know if there's specific features you might want to see for the first version. I think obviously building and deploying the flow libraries, of course. I think having the CLI, that's definitely a must. Having the engine work, even if the versioning's not functional, at least having like a minimum, you know, flow run functionality work. I was thinking cron schedules. You'll probably want to be able to find at least one, if not multiple cron schedules, for a flow. The web dashboard's essential. Having the ability to look at flows, to look at flow library plugins, to be able to chart successes and failures and that kind of thing. I figured a lot of that stuff would be, fairly essential for version one. But I'm curious, like, is there anything you'd like to see? Um, yeah, I don't know. That'd be kind of cool to see. Oh, my friend Boot Duke's in here. What's up, my dude? What's up? Appreciate you dropping in, Boot Duke. We've just had a blast. I've been talking to Anthony, who just dropped out, and David, and a couple other people. It's been really fun to kind of discuss what's going on with Didact. So I appreciate that. It's been a blast today. By the way, I am not sponsored by these people, but the Swedish Fish flavored Ghost energy drinks, oh my gosh, they're good. This is like my new coffee that I drink every day. Oh my gracious, that's so good. Yeah, I appreciate that, Boot Dude. Um, but yeah, David, let me know if there's any features that you'd like to see. Um, yeah, I'm kind of just thinking through what all to add for the first version. Oh, here we go. David said, "What about a public-facing internal status health check dashboard?" Yeah, 100%. Um, I wish I was good at Figma, David. I would draw like a little mock-up for you where I could show you kind of what I want to build. I'm trying to think if there's like a fast way to do this. You may laugh at me, and you have my full permission to do so, but I'm not even gonna lie to you. I may just go into Microsoft Paint, and we'll just do this the good old-fashioned way. Appreciate that, Boot Dude. Thank you. You're a pro at live streaming, and I need all the help I can get, so I appreciate that. So you know what I'm thinking, David? Let me see here. How do you do text boxes in Microsoft Paint? I know this is so goofy. What's like is there not like a text box thing I can do in here? I feel so silly. There we go. Okay. Took me a second. Okay. No, that's okay. You know what? That ain't gonna work. I'm trying to think what the easiest way to show you would be. Um, David said, I imagine there's a leading status page that already exists. I've used a fresh service one, and there's stuff like Grafana, Prometheus, and the whole ecosystem. Yeah, good point, David. I'm not super duper familiar with Grafana and the likes. I haven't used it super much. I haven't used it a whole lot. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. So what I was envisioning would be, you know what? There's a way I can show you. There's a way I can show you. Give me just a second. How about this? You know what? We'll do it this way. I can show you in here. Let's do CD apps Didact console. This is actually the user interface for Didact console, the customer facing app I've got to make. But I can show you. Oh goodness gracious! Let me just open up a new terminal here. I can actually show you what I'm thinking here. npm run dev. By the way, I'm funny enough, even though I'm like a C# fanatic, I actually do my user interface design in like Nuxt or Vue.js, and I gotta tell you how I'm gonna do the user interface. It's actually kind of insane how I'm doing this. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm creating a single page application because they're super lightweight and they're really fast and nimble, and they get paired with .NET Web APIs like perfectly. And what what I'm doing is I'm going to have Nuxt here, which is like Nuxt is, if you're not familiar, it's a meta framework that sits on top of Vue.js. So Vue.js is like a single page app JavaScript framework. I'm sure you're probably familiar with that, and React and Angular and Svelte and a couple other ones. So Nuxt will spit out set of build files for the single page app, and then what I'm going to do is like serve them from a .NET app. And the reason I'm doing that is so that Didact UI can be like an executable that you can actually run on your machine. You can't do that with a single page app normally, or like a static website, because it's just, an index.html file with CSS and JavaScript. And you can't like run that on your local machine or whatever. You have to set that up on like, IIS or something. So I'm building the single page app, and then I'm going to serve it from a .NET app so it can kind of be wrapped with like some nice server side functionality. It's a little goofy. I've had some people in C Sharp kind of be like, why don't you use Blazor or something? And honestly, I have nothing against Blazor or Razor pages or any of that kind of stuff. I just haven't. I just haven't ever used it for my day job. I'm a full stack developer, and um, for all the stuff that I've done, I've only ever really had to use single page apps, honestly, for front end stuff. It seems like for most full stack stuff, and you can tell me if you've seen differently, David, but for most full stack stuff I've seen with C Sharp, it's usually some kind of C Sharp backend, and then it's some kind of like single page app front end. And usually when people talk about like full stack C Sharp stuff, it seems like most of the time, it seems like most of the time it's some kind of single page app, plus a REST API. For whatever reason, that's just really, really popular pairing. It is really good though. So Vue is what my new employer uses. I liked Angular, and I'm excited to learn more about Vue and Nuxt. I'm slightly familiar with Next and SvelteKit. That's awesome. Uh, you're going to be fine, David. It's fantastic. Um, I think that a lot of the nice things that Vue.js has, I think they borrowed a lot of the concepts from Angular. So if you're like familiar with Angular and you've used Angular in the past, I think you're going to like Vue because they do a lot of similar things architecturally. I think like Angular and Vue are more similar to each other, and then React is kind of over here. Um, and I'll, full disclosure, I am a fanatic fan of Vue.js. I think Evan You, the creator of Vue.js, he is probably one of the single most gifted software engineers like in existence today. Like, I am an avid fan of what that guy works on. If you didn't know, he's also the author of Vite.js. Vite is like the module bundler that single page apps use nowadays. And Evan You actually created Vite.js while he was working on the third version of Vue, but he needed like a break. And he was also, I think he was frustrated with Webpack, if I remember the story right. He was using Webpack or something to bundle like front end stuff. And he was irritated with how slow it was going, and he actually created Vite while he was working on Vue 3. And then ironically, like Vue is huge, right? But Vite took off so much that like it's now completely the whole front end world. It's insane how many people use Vite. Um, and okay, yeah, yeah, you know about Vite, so awesome. Yeah, so what's cool? Like this plugin architecture that we've been talking about with Didact, I've been looking at the most successful software engineers in existence today, like the most successful people with the biggest user bases and the biggest tools that have the best DX you've heard of and all this stuff. And you want to know something interesting? It seems like almost every single one of them use plugins. Vite is so famous right now for many reasons, especially the speed, of course, with which it bundles things. But one of the things that Vite does so well is plugins. Evan You and open source developer named Anthony. Anthony is working on Vue and Nuxt and Vite, a few other things. Anyway, they designed it as a plugin architecture, and they basically expose hooks that happen in the Vite build process. And then if you have looked at any Vue stuff at all, you'll 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 see that Vue.js also has plugins, like it exposes lifecycle hooks and that sort of thing. And it's crazy, like how useful that is to developers, and how, sorry, I had to mute the music for a minute. How like just good of a DX experience that is, or excuse me, how good of a developer experience that is for people. Like it's awesome. Same with VS Code. Yeah, 100%, David. You're totally right. I think that's a huge reason why VS Code has gotten so big. The plugins, right? Like the plugins have made a lot of VS Code what it is. Not to mention it's fast. Not to mention it's got all the other nice stuff baked into it. Nice theming, nice fonts, nice code, all that kind of stuff. But like the plugins, oh my gosh, the plugins are like so good in VS Code. They're so good in Vite. And it's funny, we're talking about this because like when I was thinking about, Didact's architecture with the assembly load context stuff and all that, right? That, we've just been discussing, I was like, plugins. Yeah. If you want to make a really powerful tool with really good DX and you want to like impress your users and make them happy and all, all that kind of stuff, I was like, plugins. Yeah. That's a good way to do stuff. Um, And anyway, I've just noticed he does that a lot in Vue.js and Vite and everything. And I feel like that's probably true with Linux and a lot of other stuff that I've seen. If I see a plugin architecture with some kind of software product or like developer tool, usually I'm kind of inclined to think like, yeah, okay, the people that like are designing this thing, like they kind of know what they're doing. So anyway, yeah, sorry, David, I got distracted. Let me show you the user interface thing I was talking about. I think you're gonna like this. Okay, there we go. Awesome. So this is the user interface for Didact Console, the customer-facing app. But let's just let me pull down the most recent version. Sorry. I'll show you what I'm thinking for the user interface since you'd asked about that. Pro tip, you should sync your Git repos when you are moving from one machine to the other. Silly me. You think I would have learned that by now. Okay, let's try that again. Yeah, it's funny, it's been kind of difficult trying to figure out how to do all this stuff because um, I'm always hopping from my laptop to my desktop now that I'm doing streaming. Kind of cool. npm install. That opens up David said that opens up the idea of community plugins for Didact too, for integrations with popular third-party APIs and such. 1,000,000,000%, 100% correct. And I appreciate you saying that, David, because, okay, there's this super cool solopreneur guy that I follow on Twitter. Um, hold on, let me get his profile up. I'm really glad you said that, actually, David. Look at that. How funny. The first person that I see show up on Twitter when I open it up is the exact guy that I'm talking about. That's so funny. Wow, how hilarious. So this guy right here, his name is Greg. I don't know Greg personally. Greg has no idea who I am. But one thing that he does, he created the Insomnia like REST client app, kind of like Postman. It was like an alternative to Postman. He created one called, I think it was Insomnia or another one. I want to say Insomnia. He ended up selling it actually, and it did really good. I think he hit like $20,000 a month from it. He's like one of my solopreneur heroes that I really look up to. And he's building a new one called Yak app. Yak is like another HTTP client, kind of like Insomnia and Postman is. And one thing that Greg has been talking about, because I see your comment, David, about the community plugins. One thing that Greg is doing for the Yak app is let me scroll down. He just had it on his Twitter profile. He was talking about it not that long ago. It's in here somewhere. Ah, there we go. Yeah. So he's letting users of Yak app do like plugin namespaces, and he wants to let them publish plugins from a CLI and then list them on the web. I think I ended up asking him in one of these posts how his users do that. Yeah, I said plugin systems are awesome. It's just basically a web app plus DB. Are you maintaining this where users can publish it? And Greg here said, yeah, it's pretty simple. I just store some zip files in a bucket and a couple of Postgres tables for metadata, and pretty easy stuff. So Greg here's got a nice little kind of plugin interface for Yak App users, where they can make community plugins and publish them, and then everyone else can install them. And it sounds pretty simple. It's just some S3 storage, some file storage, a pretty UI database. I think I could do something like this. And maybe something like this would be good in Didact Console. I keep saying that I keep saying that Didact Console is for customers, but honestly, free users could probably find it useful too. Because if I have community plugins, it would be nice to have like a little community plugin center where you can upload plugins and like you can rate plugins, and that kind of thing. Maybe you want like plugins for like Mailchimp, or like I don't know, like resend for email sending, or like uh, like a SMS service, a weather API. It could be anything really, I guess. That would be kind of cool to be able to do. Um, yeah, give Yak App a try. I'm sure Greg would appreciate that. He would probably. I'm gonna have to tag him on Twitter later and let him know I gave him a shout out here on stream. Yeah, but it's pretty cool. Like, it's cool to see another solopreneur doing like a public community plugin, setup like this. I think that'd be kind of fun to do too. So, your original question, David, was about the user interface. You were wanting to know, like, kind of how it's going to be set up. So one thing I was sort of thinking about was what I was thinking about was kind of give you an idea for a couple of the screens I'm kind of thinking. That can really be a GitHub repo with a README that links to other repos, which have community plugins. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think it would be a good open source repo. And yeah, that makes sense. Doesn't have to be a whole custom interface, especially up front. Yeah, you're totally right. You're doing a good job at reminding me not to overkill it for a first version, and I appreciate that, David, because I have a horrible tendency to kind of overdo the first version on things, and I'm trying to actively fight that these days. Especially now that I've taken a leap of faith, I gotta get I gotta get stuff working here. Oh goodness sakes! I bet it's probably because. Okay, it's gonna be goofy. Okay, all right, that's fine. Sorry about that. I was going to show you the user interface. I'm probably missing some environment variable or something on my machine that I need. Here's kind of what I was thinking for the UI. Imagine like an application sidebar, kind of like a little dashboard with the little, links on the side that go like on the side of the page like people, normally do. So what I was thinking was I would have a few pages for you. Imagine these are like, links on the dashboard. So I was thinking flows, obviously, so you could see like which flows you have registered in the database. I was thinking flow runs. You'll be able to want to see, specific execution history for specific flows. I think that's definitely a given. I think you would probably want to see deployments, which are basically the plugins. What are essentially the different flow libraries that you have, registered in the database. I think that would be useful. Engines, I think that would be a good one. Engines would be, okay, how many instances of Didact Engine do you have running right now? How many instances do you have running? And what is the health check status of each of those engines? So if you have like 5 of them, when is the last time that all five of them sent a heartbeat. You would be able to see that on the engines page, is kind of what I'm thinking. Heartbeats is definitely a big part of job orchestrators that I've seen, because if you have like long running jobs, for example, you may want occasional heartbeats coming out of them to make sure that they're alive. And you also just want heartbeats from the engines themselves to make sure like the engines themselves are still up and running and they're doing okay. And so I think like even a basic heartbeat or health status page on the Didact UI dashboard, I think that would be good too. And you brought up a good point about like Grafana and some of the other integrations. I probably need to look into that in some later versions of Didact, so people can use that as like a nice integration. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I think the engines page could be pretty simple to start out with, probably just like a table or like a card page or something. Just lists every engine and the current health status of it, something like that. Um, there's a bunch of other things I'd like to add in here too. I'm thinking like one thing that would be nice is maybe like a Swagger doc link or something. Um, Didact Engine is going to have a REST API that it ships inside of it. So not only can you interact with Didact through the CLI, but also I'm exposing a REST API inside of Didact Engine so that you can do things through a REST API. I think that would be super useful. So I was kind of thinking like, it'd be cool to have like a little link to the, Swagger page or something. I think that would be kind of useful. There's a nice solopreneur app that I'm a big fan of where he's the guy who founded it did the same thing. This is another solopreneur I'm a big fan of. I'm a solopreneur, so I take a lot of inspiration from other solopreneurs because these people are super cool. So this guy he's from Europe, I believe, and he made a really awesome open source email sending application. Or excuse me, it used to be open source. I think it's just source available now. And he does uh, open source email stuff. I think this is a source available email thing now. What I was gonna say was somewhere on here. He's got a picture of. Oh yeah, yeah. Here we go. So an email engine. He's actually got his Swagger document in here. So you can see the endpoints for your REST API. As you have his email engine application running. Shout out to Andre. I think Andre is his name that makes email engine. Um, he's got a nice link in here to the Swagger document that I really like. This is pretty cool. I think that'd be kind of useful to have. Let's see. That sounds great. Could probably filter flow runs by flow runs by engine instance. Yes, 100%. I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, David. I think having some basic filters would be really nice. Filtering by flow run, filtering by engine, filtering by flow, filtering by maybe even like inputs or something that you could send to the flows. I think that would be super useful. And this is another architectural conundrum I was trying to figure out the other day too. I think it would be very, very useful to know every time a flow run is instantiated and what engine it runs on. Here's an interesting thought for you, David. I was kind of thinking about this too because temporal and some other background job and orchestration systems do this. I was thinking, like, what if you have a long-lived background job where, like, you want to do a long pause between step one and step two? So like, what if you have like a flow that you design where you make like a call to your database or something, and then you want to wait like 5 hours before you do something else? Well, you don't probably want to keep that flow run running for 5 hours because that's just wasting, memory and possibly a CPU core and all that. And so you may want to like be able to put your flow run to sleep. I'm looking into some complex like workflow mechanics you can do. I don't think it's going to be a V1 thing because I don't have the capacity for that just yet. I need to finish like a lot of these other basic features. But I was thinking, like, what if you had a flow run with two steps? You run step one, you put it to sleep for 5 hours, and you wake it up 5 hours later and do step two. And I was thinking, like, it would probably be pretty useful for you to know if the flow run ran on two different engines. Like if you do step one on one engine, put it to sleep for 5 minutes or 5 hours, and then run it on a different one, you probably want to be able to know that. And so I agree with you. I think basically having detailed event logging for what happens with a flow and a flow run, I think that would be pretty essential, so that you can know exactly what happens where. Um, let's see. Swagger or Scalar would be awesome. It might be pretty easy win with .NET too. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, yeah. I use Swagger right now, but I've kind of been looking at Scalar a little bit because they have a nice looking user interface too. Oh, so flows dependent on other flows or multi-step flows. That's awesome. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like, what if you have multi-step flows and you want to do like, deferred sleeps or temporal calls them. So when you have a workflow that you put to sleep, say for like 5 hours, temporal calls that a durable timer, I believe is the vocabulary they use. And you can do a durable timer for a second, 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 years. They can do like pretty much anything. In the background, it's probably them just saving metadata to the database and timestamping stuff, and then just using polling mechanisms and that kind of stuff. Not going to be probably very different from what I do. They do some like gRPC stuff in their internal architecture, but I decided not to go that route. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like if you have multi-step flows or flows dependent on other flows like child flows or subflows, I think it would be useful to be able to put stuff to sleep, wake it back up, and have detailed event logging, for if you have two, three, four, 500 pieces, you're always probably going to want to know what ran on each piece and where, and you'll probably want detailed event logging for everything. So David said, and the state would persist in the DB. I imagine that's awesome. That's kind of that's kind of what I've been looking into. Temporal does that with some of the stuff that they have. They do what do they call it? I think they call it like replays. Like you can do environment replays inside of their service, and you can do like rehydration of state and that kind of thing. That's one thing that I'm looking at with Didact. You're just curious, by the way, is that something you would want to see sooner, rather than later? Do you have workflows of such a complicated nature where like you would benefit from having stuff like that? Because I have some ideas about how to do all this, and like I said, I've been looking into it the last couple of years already. But I'm just curious. Would you benefit from constructs like that, like really complicated workflows, or is that something? Yeah, maybe you'd see more in like a later version. Let me know what you think about that. Kind of curious. Yeah, I think there's a lot of other interesting features I kind of want to have, on the user interface too. I think I want to do some nice integrations for like secret storage too. You know, if you want to do environment variables or use key vaults, that kind of thing. I think that'd be cool. You might take a glance at Aspire for logging UI if you haven't yet. Built-in logging is awesome. I have been looking at Aspire. I follow David Fowler on Twitter and a couple other, well, more than a couple other .NET people. And I see David is constantly talking about .NET Aspire. I've seen some Nick Chaps' videos and a few other ones too, where they talk about .NET Aspire stuff, which I think is kind of cool. So I appreciate the recommendation. I will actually make a note of that. Do. I'm gonna look more into Aspire dashboard logging and also Discord server. Yeah, I'll make sure to do all that. Yeah, I think that would be cool. At my last job, there were some really complicated flows. I don't think it hurts to keep things simple up front, though. Yeah, you're the MVP today, David. You keep reminding me not to overdo things for the first version. Just gotta like you know like thank you. I gotta send you a virtual hug your way. I appreciate that. You're totally right. But I think that would probably be good to have. That would probably be good to have as a roadmap feature. Let me just see real quick if I've got that on the roadmap. Do I have anything about like durable sleeps or like deferred sleeps? If I don't, I think I'm going to add that. That would be good. Probably not a V1. I agree with you, David. I think that would be good for a later version. Yeah, well, we'll come back to that. I'll make a note though that we'll do add deferred sleeps to roadmap. And I'm sure that would be something that would be done in multiple phases, with multiple API updates and that kind of thing. But good to have it. It's good to keep it in mind. We can come back to it, sometime later. Um, yeah, so that's kind of my idea with the user interface, though, is your flows, your flow runs, your deployments, aka your plugins, your engines, a REST API link for the Swagger or the Scalar dog. Um, there's actually like a bunch of stuff that I can put in here too. I think that like really, really detailed logging, kind of like you were mentioning with the Aspire dashboard a second ago, I think that would be super useful to have. I think that like being able to have detailed logging for when Didact Engine is copying and loading an assembly load context for a plugin. I think that would be useful to have in logging. When things get instantiated, when versions get updated. I want to make sure there's some pretty detailed logging available in this. I need to think about that. I don't know if that would be like a dashboard link per se. Probably what's going to happen is some of these are going to have some sublinks or something. Maybe under engines, I'm going to have like engine tunings, that kind of thing. I think I'm going to have some various subpages will probably or maybe tabs or something that we'll find useful. So something else that would be cool is an option to have two different flows, same level, not parent/child, and have the option to trigger flow B when flow A completes its execution. Okay, I think I'm following you. So basically have it set up where, okay, let me read that one more time. Something else that would be cool is an option to have two different flows, same level, not parent-child, and have the option to trigger flow B when flow A completes its execution. Maybe that's covered by the Q ideas on the roadmap. Haven't read everything yet. Yeah, no problem, David. It's okay. It's we're talking about a lot of some deep mechanic stuff, so no problem at all. This is what happens when I go radio silent for so long, and then I just kind of throw everything out. You're a great listener, so no problem at all. Um, yeah, so you're basically talking about having kind of like an event-driven, dependency. One flow waits on another flow. I think something like that is probably possible because, and I'm glad you mentioned this actually, David, because back in my entities folder when I was kind of going over, the assembly load context and the plugin and the execution version and all that, um, triggers is the word I was looking for. I have kind of come up with the idea of a trigger concept where when flows get executed, they get executed by various types of triggers. And I've actually got some really cool ideas for how I want to deal with triggers. Maybe like, it could be as simple as a cron schedule. It could be typing a flow's name in the user interface and you click like an execute button and you run a flow run, that way. I think that would be a really, really great, trigger event to capture in the database. Um, yeah, what I've got right now for trigger types is I think I've got API, user interface, a cron schedule, and then a flow run where like maybe a flow calls another flow. That would be like a good trigger type. This is like a constants class that I'll be using in the engine. So I wonder like maybe we have like a new trigger type for what you're talking about. Like Trying to think like what a good name for that would be. Let me reread your sentence one more time. Yeah, two flows, same level, not parent-child, have the option to trigger flow B when flow A completes its execution. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying. All right, I remember reading about triggers and Didact. That's awesome. Plenty sensible. Yeah, I appreciate that, David. Thank you, thank you. You're my hype person today. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's kind of why I did it. I was kind of thinking through this. This was probably about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago. But yeah, I was thinking through trigger types, and I was like, the UI could trigger something, a cron job could trigger something, maybe you could even trigger, a flow run from like a CLI call. I bet that would probably be another one, honestly. So like new trigger types. Yeah, could do like a public const string, um, CLI invocation. I don't know, something like that. Uh, and say CLI invocation. Maybe another trigger type would be like what you were talking about, public const string. Maybe like well, I'm trying to think what a good name for that would be. Like like a upstream execution maybe. Upstream execution completed. Probably a little too wordy, but yeah, something like that. That's kind of, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think I can kind of see that. Yeah, something like a waterfall trigger or something could help with maximizing available hardware resources if timing isn't pressing right. And then use case I'm thinking of is fetching a bunch of data from an API into a database table, and then a separate flow for transforming the data. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep. Yep. I got you. Yeah. Okay. I think I see where you're going with that. UI and CLI invocation could even both be covered by an API trigger. True. True. Yeah. I'm kind of back and forth on that because ultimately, like if you're doing something with a CLI, it's probably going to hit the REST API. Well, actually, if the CLI doesn't go through the REST API, but it directly talks to the database, I suppose. I don't know. I gotta think about that one actually. Maybe CLI invocation does deserve its own one. Okay, so let me get your opinion on something then, David. Since you're talking about like where you would have let's go back to your use case. So you're thinking you would have one flow fetch a bunch of data from an API into a database table, and then separate have a separate flow for transforming the data. Right, 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 right. Okay. You know what? I think this is probably where blocks would come in. Yep, I think 100% what we're talking about here is basically my like more advanced workflow mechanics. I think what we're talking about here is blocks. So let's say I think I have an example flow in here. So this is what a flow looks like. Probably should have shown this earlier, by the way. Sorry, it took me like forever to show you this. This is kind of what an example flow looks like. You'll have a class, you'll give it a name, and you'll implement the iFlow interface, from a Didact core. This is a NuGet package I'm going to publish soon so that you can use it when you make your flows. You'll inject any dependencies that you want here in the constructor. You'll have a configure method where you set up all the metadata like the name, the description, the version, so on and so forth. All that would be done here. And then the execute async is where your magic happens with your flow. So this is like, the logic that you actually have for your background job, whether it's calling database, calling an API, doing transformations in SQL, doing something, with a file, whatever the case may be. this is where all the magic happens here in your flow. This is where your background job kind of does the thing that it needs to do. This all takes place in what's called the execute async method, and it gets a context object called iFlow execution context. You'll have like metadata, you'll have run metadata, flow metadata, library metadata, plugin metadata, all that kind of good stuff. I'm basically going to method inject that. So when this class gets instantiated asynchronously in the background by Didact Engine, I'll do method injection for the configure async and method injection for the execution context. And essentially, if you need any of that metadata available when you're running a flow, you'll have all that available, which is kind of cool. So this is kind of what a basic flow looks like. Going back to your point about having flow A fetch data from an API and then flow B transforms it in SQL. I think that would be a great example of what I call blocks. So there is a really good article I have on the Didact website where I compare Didact to Temporal, which is like a really good workflow software. They've raised like $1 gazillion. They've been going for a little while. That's awesome. Looks very .NET, very useful. Oh, appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, you're talking about the structure of the class. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. A lot of modern .NET stuff uses constructor injection for everything. Dependency injection is kind of just a go-to for everything. And I like the method injection here because these are small, nimble classes. At first, I was having these be put in the constructor, but these are real specific, real small classes for really specific use cases. It honestly makes the class a little lighter when you instantiate it if I don't constructor inject, these objects and I just method inject them when I need them. That's kind of the nice thing about pre-building an orchestrator is I can make these opinionated decisions, for all of my users, and then they don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. Ideally the engine and all of the background modules that I'm making, it just takes care of this and it just kind of removes the irritation, so you just don't have to think about it. So yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. Thank you for the the feedback on that. What I was going to say about Temporal is if you go to the Didact website, I've got a Didact versus Temporal article that I made, and one of the things that I talked about is blocks and activities. So in Didact, I call them blocks. In Temporal, they call them activities. They do it one way. I'm going to do it a different way. I think that my way, this is just my opinion, of course, and of course I'm biased because I'm making Didact. But my opinion is I'm going to try and do it a more minimal, more convenient, I think easier way versus the way that I've seen other orchestrators do this. You were talking about your example use case where you call data from an API and then you transform it into a database. So you're talking about like a multi-step workflow, right? You've got these different steps. One step has to happen after another step does. And maybe it would be useful for you to have detailed metadata about each step. If step one is calling data from the API, you would probably want to be able to know exactly when that happens. So a start and a stop date. And then you would want to know like what engine did I call the API with? If I have like a cluster of Didact engines, like say 3 of them, which one did, the first part of the workflow? You could put it to sleep for a couple hours. Maybe you say like, okay, I'm going to give it 5 hours and transform the data, and then step 2 would be, you transform the data on the database. Now that could take place on a different engine. So what you're talking about is kind of what I have designated as blocks inside of Didact. I don't have them fully ready yet, but let me give you an idea for what they're supposed to do. I think you will find this quite interesting. So let's say you don't have multiple flows for your example. You fetch data, step 1, you transform data, step 2. Let's just say that's one flow instead of 2, but here's what we're going to do. For the first part, which is you're fetching data from the API, instead of making an entire flow for that, What if we kind of took a different approach and we did what is called a block? So the idea with these little things are essentially, let's say I make an action block. Now this block here, let's say we're going to give it a few pieces of metadata. Maybe you won't use the new keyword. You would use something else for this, but just bear with me. We're just going to pretend that this gets instantiated with dependency injections, so you're not, using new. Maybe it would be like iService provider or something. I have some helpers for this, but just bear with me. Let's just say, how about this? We'll just say, we'll go with the new keyword for a minute, but just bear with me. Just for like a simple example here. So we do new, we do action block, right? And then let's go down to what I basically do these with Fluent APIs. We'll give it a name, some action block, dot with description, calls my third-party API with executor. Aha, there we go. Okay, wrong one. With executor. Okay, this is super weird, but I think it works. So you were saying that you want to have an action, right? Or you want to have like a step that calls an API. What if we basically think of that as like a delegate? Does that make sense? So like maybe it's as simple as one method call. Maybe it's a Lambda function. You have like a little expression tree, like like a little anonymous like Lambda function, something like that. Maybe it could be a like a method call, from like a dependency, right? That's in your plugin, whatever it may be. Let's just say it's like a Lambda function. And so, maybe you have a service that calls your API. So it would be like, my API service, my API service. And up here, you would do private read only, my API service, my API service. And then down here, you would do my API service equals, and then you would do my API service, right? So we'll just set it, let's just say you have a service where you can call your API. You inject that into the constructor. We'll save that as a private read-only field, pretty standard .NET stuff. Let's say down here, right, you have a Lambda function, or not even a Lambda really. Let's just say let's just say we call a method, and we'll say, we'll just say something like, await my API service dot call API async. Something like easy like that, like something, kind of simple and straightforward. So essentially, how cool would it be if you could break flows that have complicated workflows down into little bite-sized pieces like this? And you could basically have a flow abstraction, kind of, minus like, some metadata and some things you probably don't need for the individual steps. What if you could still get like a lot of the nice, benefits though of, having flow-like metadata available for individual steps? And so maybe, right, your delegate that you call, I call it your executor. Maybe I should rename it to delegate. I don't know. We'll just say your executor. You call API async from your service. You could even do something like with timeout, with soft timeout. We'll say like, is that IntelliSense does not work super good on the web version. What is the timeout? I think that's soft timeout milliseconds. That's an int. Let's just say like, after, I don't know, like a minute. So that'd be, what, 60,000 milliseconds. Maybe we'll do a timeout and maybe we'll do a retry policy and we'll say, yeah, if something goes wrong with the API, maybe we can do some retries and we'll say, the max retries. Let's do with retries. So it's max retries, retry milliseconds. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you could do like 5 retries, and you could do like you could do like 20 seconds in between each one, something like that. What I think I would do for this is I would actually add retry policies, so it's not like a constant thing. You could probably do like no back off. You could do a constant back off. You could do an exponential back off. Maybe you could add like a jitter factor in there. And so, like, you could jitter the retries, so that you don't do like the stampede problem, against the REST API. Let's just say, for example, like, this flow is running on 3 different engines that you have in a cluster, just in case something goes wrong, like maybe they're having like some weird service problem or something. I know that some people want to avoid like, the cattle stampede problem where like, a bunch of servers are retrying the API all at the same time or something. So maybe instead of like constant retries, pretend that this could be like a policy you could send in. You could do like maybe I would make an object called block retries options or something, and you could do like the policy. You could do the type like exponential or whatever. You could add a jitter factor. We could do all sorts of fun stuff, right? Like we could do all sorts of weird things like that. So like what if you had, a piece for each one of these? So you had this one, which would do the API call, and then you had this one, which would be let's give it better names. Let's call it the API block. And then let's say that this one would be like the SQL transformation block. And then this one, the description would be like does SQL transformations server side, something like that. And then instead of my API service, it would be like like my database service, service, and yeah, I think maybe we do the same thing up here. Then private read only, my database service, my database service, and we'll we'll inject that dependency and save it to a field. My database service equals my database service. Okay, and then on your second block in the delegate with executor call, maybe you would just be like, my database service transform data async, something like that. And then you could define your retries, your timeouts, and all that kind of stuff. And then this is just defining the blocks. This is not running them. So then once they're defined, maybe you could do it like this, and you could say this is the API action block, and this is the SQL action block. And so you'll come down here and you'll say, okay, API, we're going to do an await API action block dot execute async, and we'll do an await SQL action block dot execute async, and let's yeah, let's just say you run them one after the other. You could run them sequentially like that. Yeah, I kind of like that. Then you had your steps broken up. Sorry, I haven't been looking at the chat here. Yeah, that's perfect. Almost like a series of mediator calls and an API endpoint. Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Love the retry policy ideas. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm a sucker for the new inline DI members from a top level constructor, just to avoid the boilerplate of the private read-only fields. The new inline DI members from the top level. Right. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, you are. You're talking about primary constructors. Got it. Got it. Got it. It looks like your class might start with the closing curly bracket. Um, Sorry, am I missing something? Maybe I misunderstood you. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure. Let me. Looks like your class might start with a closing curly bracket. Maybe it was just something weird with my screen. Um, yeah, this is kind of the idea. I'm going to take that into mind, by the way. David, you mentioned that you like the primary constructors, so you don't have to do the private read-only fields. Um, that is a good point. Let me um, let me make a note of that. Um, uh, Look into flow construction via primary constructors, saves boilerplate, which you're totally right. It 100% does. Yeah, you're totally right about that. I'm gonna keep that in mind. Never mind. I was looking at indentation levels. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No problem. No problem. But yeah, what do you think about this, David? So like, you would essentially just have a block, per, you know, per action that you want to do. And maybe it could even be you could have like a sleeper block. You could do like var sleeper block or something. Yeah, yeah. We'll say sleeper block, and it would be new. I don't know, deferred sleep block or something like that. And then you would do like with with sleep duration hours or something, and it would be 5. Then you could even do something interesting like that, where you could be like, await sleeper block, uh, dot sleep, something like that, and then you could just kind of break apart, your workflow into little pieces. Anyway, you kind of get the idea. Um, essentially, instead of maybe having multiple flows, you take a multi-step flow, you break it into delegates, whether it's like a Lambda function, whether it's like a method call, from another class library, or like a service you injected from the constructor, and then essentially like each step of your process, you make a wrapper block for each of those delegates, and then give them all the configurations they need, like sleeps and retries. And some of it is a little redundant, and I do realize that, because a lot of the things that you see here, like the retries and the timeouts and all that, you've got those on flows too. So it would be a little redundant. Like the flows themselves have those metadata configurations, and the blocks also would. But I think what's nice about the blocks is like it's kind of less overhead, where if you don't need all of the orchestration functionality a flow provides, but you just want to wrap steps of your workflow, into traceable pieces and retriable pieces and all that. I feel like that blocks could be like a nice intermediary object for you to use. You don't have to go all the way necessarily to using a flow, but you still get the benefits of like a flow's orchestration magic. Plus, you get like individual delegate wrappers essentially. And I kind of liked the delegate approach, where we're using the with executor command, because, like I said, it could be anything. It could just you inject a service and use it. You could call a method from another class library you're referencing, or it could be a Lambda function or something. Because Hangefire does that a lot. Like a lot of people in Hangefire, they do the fire and forget method. Where they do like the anonymous method call with like a Lambda function, and it'll be like send email async or something, and it's like a fire and forget kind of thing. You could do the same thing here essentially. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Heck yeah, I love the deferred sleep block. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. That's actually really good feedback, David. Appreciate that. Yeah, that's kind of the idea behind that. I would basically have, different kinds of blocks. And these are like real simple blocks that don't have any inputs and outputs, but I think another great thing would be like, offering blocks that have actual inputs and outputs, kind of like other services and libraries do. And yeah, I think that would be good, so you could actually pass data between them. And that kind of goes back to the whole like, persisting state to the database idea that you discussed with me. And I think that was a great idea too. So I think, my question would be like, for you, for the kind of workflows that you're needing to do and the sort of like multi-step processes you may be dealing with, would this be something you would find useful even in a version one? Or is this something that you feel like, could be put off temporarily? I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that. Because, I was thinking about putting this off temporarily for a V1, but even like just a couple of them might be useful. I don't know. Kind of curious what you think. Blocks are great, keeps related steps together in a single flow, which is great for organization and reasoning. Yeah, appreciate that. That's kind of what I was thinking too. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, I think it would be good. Like it would be yeah, like it would be useful for just, kind of big multi-step things like this. I think that would be useful. Another thing I was thinking about too. I was thinking like, what if you so another example of an orchestrator that deals with stuff like this is Prefect. They have sort of a similar step thing where you can do like individual steps or you can do like whole workflows. Um, if I was still at my last job, I'd want it to be one, but in my current role, I wouldn't need it up front. Okay, that's reasonable. That's reasonable. Um, so it probably, per your comment, it probably just depends on what company you're with. It probably depends on what kinds of services you're using. Do you need deferred sleeps or anything? Um, no, that totally makes sense. That totally makes sense. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Thank you for the feedback. Um, Yeah, so another, interesting thing about these pieces is like if you do retries, maybe your API action block succeeded and your sleeper block succeeded, but the SQL action block had some sort of like weird exception that popped up, where you like the SQL transformation failed for like some reason, whatever it may be. Maybe like the database was out of commission or there was some lock or something that happens. So what happens when you retry the flow? Because the other two blocks may have ran successfully and the SQL block did not run successfully. You may not want to, you probably don't want to repeat the first two. If the API action block ran and the sleeper block slept, you probably don't want to redo both of those just because the third block failed. So one thing that I've kind of thought about too is like having like like a block workflow, options thing you could do, where maybe it could be like maybe it could be like a method or something where it could be like, um, upon success or something. It could be like uh, success behavior, do not repeat, or something like that. Same thing here. Upon success, maybe I don't know. Maybe it'd be the other way. Maybe it could be like repeat or something. And then that way, like if your flow fails and it needs to rerun this entire execute async method, certain blocks you could be like, okay, don't repeat those if they already ran once. Other blocks you could be like, yeah, you can repeat those if they ran successfully one time. or something like that. And then you could deal with like retries. I don't know. Would you find that interesting? Is that useful? Is that interesting? Maybe, maybe not. I'm just kind of throwing ideas out there. I think it would be something kind of fun to add to the API. What do you think about that? That'd be cool. Let me know. Let me know what you think about that. And that's kind of the idea. And I know you said in the comment just now you don't need it for a first version, which is totally totally reasonable. So maybe that's something I could tackle here in just a couple months or something. I think that'd be really fun. Yeah, it's cool. That's really cool. Had an issue in real life where third-party API returned NAN and we stored it successfully in div table of string. The transformation kept failing. Yeah, fair. Yeah, fair. Totally fair. Yeah, the way Prefect does it in their orchestrator is when they have little bite-sized pieces. They call them tasks, and you can probably understand why I did not want to use that terminology because task means something very specific in C sharp. I did not want to confuse people. I like block. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I think their default behavior is something like blocks repeat. I'm sorry, blocks do not repeat by default, but you can make them repeat if you need to on like a retry or something. Um, Again, they don't call them blocks, but whatever their equivalent is, I think they call it a task. So yeah, that's kind of the idea behind it. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, very cool stuff. Yeah, I've got a lot of good ideas. Let me write this down. Did I put? Let me add another thing here. Create community plugins for you know for common code chunks, accessors, integrations, etc. Uh, think of Greg with the Yak app. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. Yeah, curious again. Any other features that you would find useful? I know we kind of talked about a few other ones earlier in the chat, but while I got you here, anything else, David, you would find useful in the first version? Kind of going back through and rereading some of our chats here. I think that I think that's a good set of stuff to kind of think about. Your feedback about the plugin versions very useful. Makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, totally makes sense. Um, Maybe the blocks are the same way. Maybe the blocks is not a V1 thing. You mentioned a second ago you don't need them right now for your current job. There's probably a decent amount of people that would say the same. I think some people, like for example, that use Hangfire, they would definitely need the blocks on V1, but there's other people that would not. I think there's a lot of people that probably do, real simple fire and forget type jobs, which makes sense. They probably would not need something like this, on an initial version. So that might be something to have a Discord channel for. I'll have to read through the roadmap first. Totally right, David. You were totally right. Yeah, I think I'll actually probably log off here in a second. I haven't eaten anything today. I need to eat some food. I'm gonna make a Discord channel and a probably fire off like another newsletter, thing or something. I'm gonna put my email in the chat again, David. If you want to just like email me, your Discord, name or whatever, that's fine. I can add you that way. If you want to just wait, if you would rather me like just send out a newsletter invite, that's fine too. No problem. I think I'll do that though because Anthony mentioned that earlier. You mentioned that. A couple other people have mentioned that. I think it would be fun to have a Discord where we can all kind of chat with each other a little bit more often. Um, yeah, this is awesome. This is awesome. Like, uh, good gracious, I've had so much fun today doing this. I'm probably, by the way, David, I'm probably going to be streaming again later tonight, if I had to guess. I've got a few things I've got to knock out just for a little bit. I will probably be streaming again later tonight and possibly tomorrow. I'm about to be unavailable for a few days for streaming after tomorrow, I think. So, yeah. So I think I'm going to try and do that later tonight, if not tomorrow. So, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you stopping in and talking about all this. Thanks for the feedback. Thanks for the ideas. I appreciate the encouragement. I got to tell you, this chat that we're doing, this makes it all worth it to me. I've been working really hard to set up my office and my streaming space. My wife was she's awesome. She was kind enough to help set up all the stuff in the back. Shout out to my wife Haley. She helped me set up the little Tie Fighter on the back wall there, the planet. Um, uh, Family member got me the Humble Hustle thing. My wife even found me this plasma sword behind me. I'm a huge Halo fan because Didact is named after my favorite Halo character. And you'll see some Halo stuff on the back table there. I've got a plasma sword, a needler, a Halo book, some Star Wars stuff. I'm a huge geek for Halo and Star Wars and all that. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. But yeah, this has been awesome. This makes it totally worth it. I appreciate you stopping by and kind of talking about all this stuff with me today. Um, it makes all the work worth it. I've hated building in silence for years. It's literally been driving me insane. I mean, I hate it. I've had all these incredible ideas for Didact and the orchestrator and everything, I just haven't had a lot of people to talk to about it. It drives me insane. And I thought this would be a good therapeutic thing for me just to kind of chat with people about. And then I thought, yeah, building public stuff, this would be cool. Maybe like some users and some customers and stuff will stop in. And yeah, we can just talk about it like while I'm working on it. Like how cool would that be? That'd be really cool. So wow, that background setup is awesome. I will tell her that. My wife will be absolutely thrilled to hear that a viewer appreciated all the hard work she helped with setting all this up. Thank you very much. Appreciate the compliment. I will pass it along to my wife. She'll be most appreciative to hear that. Yeah, it's excited to be here. I might not be on the next couple of streams because I've got two toddlers and a third kid on the way. Hey, congratulations on number three. That is awesome. No problem at all. No problem at all. Family is important. I'll just tell you just real quick. That is definitely an ethos part of like kind of why I'm doing this. So Didact is not VC funded. I haven't raised any money. Um, Very pro family. Totally am with you there. I'm a big fan of MicroConf. They're kind of a bootstrap solopreneur community, and a lot of those people talk about family time and spending time with the wife and the kids and all that too. And I'm with you. I'm so with you on that. I think like building a business, you don't have to like shoot for like gigantic, enormous VC money. I mean, you can if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to do. But I also think like, you can make some great businesses and just kind of make a good life for you and your family, do some open source stuff, have some sustainability and some monetization without necessarily going like super overboard with it. Like, I don't know. That's cool. Congratulations on number three. And that is awesome. And family, makes it all the more worth it and more fun. So congratulations to you. That's great. I'm gonna hop off. Thank you so much for joining. I will make that Discord server. I will send you and others some notifications about that. I absolutely would love to chat with you again when you have the time. It would be super fun to get some more of your ideas, David, on everything. So awesome, awesome day. Had a blast. Thank you so much for being such a good listener and letting me geek out about all this stuff with you. Really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm gonna hop off and get some food. And if you're free later, like I said, I'll probably be on. If not, no problem. Have a great weekend with the family, regardless. Appreciate the feedback, and we'll talk again real soon. Take it easy. I'll see y'all later. Bye.